Yes, sir. Sachin. After reading 5.1, the problem of defining deconstruction, I have several doubts. Say, for instance, why is it difficult to define deconstruction? Secondly, the question comes is like, why is it not a negative term? And the third point is like, how does deconstruction happen on its own? I would request you to elaborate a bit on this.
Thank you, Dilip. It's a very pertinent and important question, and often students are at loss when they try to grapple with the definition of term deconstruction. One very important question which Derrida is asking throughout his entire career is whether it is possible to define something once and for all, rigorously, and whether and what are its limits. To what extent can you define something? So that becomes a kind of basic question which Derrida is asking. And keeping that in mind, the term that he uses, deconstruction, he refuses to define it, saying that like all other terms that we use in philosophy or literary criticism for that matter, even deconstruction cannot be once and for all finally defined. Okay. Right? And students and scholars often want something that is clear-cut and defined for their use.
Yes.
And so Derrida becomes very difficult philosopher to read. So that is one reason why deconstruction is a very difficult idea
To define. Yes. So why is it a negative term?
Yeah.
Why is it exactly not a negative term?
Right. Because Derrida says that it's not a destructive activity. It's not something breaking down something for sake of destruction. But what Derrida is doing is inquiring into the condition or what causes a philosophical system to stand up on its feet and fall down. So what are the conditions which make a philosophical or intellectual system possible? So he is inquiring into the foundations and is also inquiring into the condition of why something cannot be defined. Or a system cannot be finally closed off. So he says that deconstruction is not a destructive activity but an inquiry into the foundations, causes of intellectual systems. So that is one reason why it's not a negative operation. But there is also the point that he makes that he wants to transform the way people think. Right? So entire structure of Western thought has to be transformed is what Derrida wants to emphasize. And he takes this from Heidegger's project of destruction, which he wants to translate into French from German. And that is what he is explaining in the famous letter to a Japanese friend. His Japanese friend was a professor who wanted to translate French text of Derrida into Japanese. And so he wants to know how to translate deconstruction.
Yes, and that is what we are going to read in the next subsection of the same unit.
Right.
So the point that comes is like, how does deconstruction happen on its own?
Right. So once you consider that it's not a destruction, but an inquiry into the limits of a philosophical system, its coherence, then we see that the conditions which produce a philosophical system are the same conditions which are putting a limit to it. Now all this is very abstract, and that is one reason why students will have great difficulty in understanding this. But the very condition, Derrida argues, which produces an intellectual system which is based on distinctions or binary oppositions, as we will see in our next units, is the same condition is responsible for undoing those oppositions. Right, and the term that he uses for this condition is difference, as we speak in French. But it is not spelled. It's not spelled differently in French, but in English, you have to show the difference. Right. So we'll look into that when we look into the unit of difference.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.